So yeah, Jeremy, again, it's good to talk to you again. It hasn't been that long since we had our last video, but this is good that we're getting into sort of a regular cadence about this. Um, and I want to let's just start with introductions for people who don't know us. I'm Nick Douglas, and I'm author of a couple of books on Creole history. One is called Finding Octave: The Untold Story of Two Creole Families in Slavery in Louisiana. And I also write regular columns for Afropunk on race and Black history.
Okay, well, my name is Jeremy Simeon. I'm a Louisiana Creole historian with a special focus on collecting depictions of people of African descent and Louisiana material culture in general.
Yeah, so Jeremy, last time we were talking about Reconstruction, and we kind of walked people through Reconstruction. I think we want to follow that up with talking about what happened after Reconstruction, and especially we'll try to keep it Louisiana centric, but I think it might move to a larger picture of that. So let me just kind of give a brief understanding of what happened with Reconstruction and why Reconstruction ended. Um, One of the main reasons that Reconstruction ended, obviously, was that the Confederates and Confederate sympathizers in the South were fighting it, against it. They were doing all kinds of nefarious things against it. But one of the more unknown reasons that prompted Reconstruction to end was this: um, in the West, the Northeastern Railroad was being fought by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, and they shut down the Northeast Railroad, which was being funded by Jay Cook and Company, which was one of the biggest uh, financial houses in the country. And because of that, Jay Cook and Company failed, and it sent the investors into a panic, and it caused the Panic of 1873. And the Panic of 1873 was a beginning of a 6-year-long depression. 89 of the 364 railroad lines failed during that time. So and what was happening in the West was affecting what was happening in the South. And so in the South, you had this battle of the Confederates and Confederate sympathizers really failing to acknowledge that they lost the war, and trying to fight back against the freeing of the slaves. I think last time we talked about just the atrocities that were happening between the time that the Emancipation Proclamation happened, the end of the war in 1865, and this sort of limbo period between 1866 and 1868, when there was literally no protection for free people, for the newly freed slaves. So there were a lot of things that were going on to end Reconstruction. And so having the contested election of 1876, where the Southern states basically made a deal asking that the troops be sent out of the South and taken out. And let's get a reason why the troops were sent there. They were sent there to do the Enforcement Act of 1870, which had criminal penalties for interfering with the right to vote. They were also sent there to enforce the Force Act, which provided for a federal election oversight. And that federal election oversight continued until current day. It was just taken off of those of many Southern states in the 2010 Supreme Court Act. So the right to vote was a huge issue that really prompted a lot of violence, and the elections of 1872 and 1876 were flush with all kinds of violence and voter fraud, carried out by the Democrats at the time, who were not the they were not the party of Lincoln, but they were the party of the Confederates and Confederate sympathizers. So we have the troops leave in 1876. And really during that uh, sort of limbo time that I talk about with between 1863 and 1868, and when these Enforcement Acts and Civil Rights Acts started to be coming out of Congress, a bunch of groups formed. One of them was the Ku Klux Klan. And the Ku Klux Klan started as a social club in Pulaski, Tennessee, in 1865, and we know that Nathan Bedford Forrest was the first Grand Wizard that we had. In the South, in Louisiana specifically, we had the White Knights and the White Camellia that were formed, and or the White Knights of the Knights of the White Camellia and the White Brotherhood were formed, right? And so they were formed strictly to intimidate black voters and intimidate black legislators. And at least 10% of the black legislators elected during the 1867-1868 period constitutional convention became victims of violence, and 7 were killed. Right. So while these sort of Confederate sympathizer groups were forming in Louisiana, we had a lot of other groups that were forming, and we had lots of men's benevolent societies and social clubs. And so we talk about the Société d'Économie. We know that was a sort of a leading group. They were at the forefront of the fight for civil rights and voting rights. They started very early on, but there were a number of other groups. For example, my relative was in Les Celances, which was a men's benevolent society. There was L'Équité, Les Jeunes Amis, just to name a few. And these societies were benevolent societies and social clubs. The Aristocrat Social Club is another one that sort of that was formed around this time. So there was a lot of men's social clubs that were being formed, and benevolent societies that were being formed, and they were being formed to fill in the gaps for social services and just economic services in general. So these social clubs funded hospitals, funded schools. For example, Les Celances also funded the fight for the Plessy versus Ferguson case. The Société d'Économie also funded that. I have a invitation to a dance that was sponsored by the Les Celances that was strictly set up to benefit the Plessy versus Ferguson case and fund it to move the case through the judicial system to the Supreme Court. So a lot of groups were being formed, and they were being formed to sort of fill in the gaps. And again, on the other side, there were groups that were being formed to fight against any social and economic progress that was being made by people of color. So Jeremy, that's kind of my my setup for that. I know that you had some points that you wanted to make, so I'm gonna let you go for it.
Right. So that was a great lead up to kind of what we were talking about. It seems like there were a lot of Confederate sympathizers who had to kind of operate under different hoods and different kinds of sheets. So with the formation of the Ku Klux Klan, we also see other societies, secret societies, kind of emerge. And some of them were not quite in the shadows as you would imagine. So everyone who's heard of New Orleans and Louisiana has probably heard of 3 things, okay? We'll go with, you've heard of voodoo. Somebody's talked about voodoo. You've heard of jazz music. You've danced to jazz music. Even if you can't dance, you dance to jazz music. And you've heard of Mardi Gras. So Mardi Gras season just passed. And what do we love about Mardi Gras? We love about the parades. We love seeing the parades and the people throwing the beads. And we love the costumes. And we love to see these ornate themes. But if you scratch away that sequence and that fancy, expensive parade floats and really get down to it, we start seeing a little bit of a darker past. Because what we actually see is we see societies or crews, Krews, formed by white people and mainly by ex-Confederates with the expressed reasons to meet in secret and to conspire. Now that sounds kind of crazy maybe when you first hear it, but it's actually not crazy at all. All of these men were sworn an oath, had to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States. And so they were not allowed to conspire. and do the things that they wanted to do, which was to bring the South back to its former glory before the war. But indeed, in certain aspects, they did do that. And they began to do these things by meeting in private under the guise that they were going to do something to help the city. Bring it back from all of this destruction. Some of them said, "Oh, well, we're going to introduce Mardi Gras to make it a tourist center, to bring unity to the citizens and to visitors." But that's not actually what happened. What it was a means to promote their own political disdain for the Reconstruction government. We see this in 1873, where they incorporate Darwin's, concepts of evolution, survival of the fittest. They mock the Reconstruction government. Remember, the convention was called the Black and Tan Convention.
Yeah, the Black and Tan Constitutional Convention, yeah.
Right, so they decide to have these black and tan men depicted as apes and monkeys parading around. Now, in the years before this, pretty much most scholars agree that the politics were kind of kept in the middle. But from this point on, you could say they just straight out exhibited, and this was really exhibited their bias, and this was a means of intimidation. It was public intimidation. It was a reminder as well, hey, listen, there's no federal troops coming anymore. They've already left the city in the future, and these were societies that exist to this day. Now, of course, I'm not saying that these are the shared ideas and beliefs of people who are still members of these crews, not all of them, but something else really interesting happened to me. We often talk about the division of the Americans coming into New Orleans and splitting up this Creole population. And when we say Creole, we're talking about culturally Creole. We're not just talking about people of African descent, but there were also white Europeans who identified as Creole. Typically, these people were French-speaking. They were Catholic. In fact, Mardi Gras, it's the whole purpose of Mardi Gras is
Catholic, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's Catholic, and it is the precursor to the Lenten season, where you're supposed to put away all those foolishness and, don't eat meat on Fridays and scale back, find out what's really important in life. But the reality is the Mardi Gras crews were being spearheaded by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. These were also the members of the Ku Klux Klan. These were also the Americans. So a lot of these organizations even excluded white citizens. They were not interested, of course, not interested in blacks, but they were not interested in Jewish people, and they were also not interested in Catholics. So you really had that last nail in the coffin, so to speak, where there was this political fight between these okay kind of white people who were racist and still had problems and looked down upon the Creoles of color, but there was some I would say a kinship with them because of these Creoles of color and the people of color. They had lived with them, and also they were Catholic and French speaking. And that really just goes away because of the rise of these Americans, these white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And the effects of Mardi Gras are still felt today. Mardi Gras is still very segregated. There are still crews that do not allow black people or people of African descent in. Now, it's got a lot better, and as a result of this discriminatory practices, we began to see black Mardi Gras rise, just like we see kind of what was going on with the Creole Society and the other societies of people of African descent. They realized what was going on, and they had to come up with their own solutions. So they came up with social clubs, like some of the ones you mentioned, the Autocrat Society, and all of this. And this was really a means of doing what they were, of opposing what these people were doing in the shadows. So this is the rise of that. This is what happens. So.
Yeah, and I mean, the backdrop to all this after the Reconstruction and the troops are gone is serious intimidation by Confederates and Confederate sympathizers on the free population of people of color in Louisiana. And we've talked about this back and forth about white Creoles. white Creoles were put in a position where they had to make a decision about what side they were going to take, and it basically became a way to set. I mean, we're talking about white Creoles, but let's be honest about this. Louisiana is the state with the highest number of people who claim to be white who have African DNA. So these are kinfolk. These are our kinfolk. They may be related, through numbers of different ways, but these are
Right.
kinfolk, and so sharing the last name, sharing common ancestors, and up until the time the Americans came, there was a I would say an amiable relationship at times. Sometimes there was a charged relationship. I mean, the ebb and flow of how things worked in during the history in Louisiana is very up and down with
Yes.
with white Creoles and Creoles of color. So when Reconstruction ended, and we were in this period between 1876 and really right to the 60s. Creole white Creoles were made to make a decision, and that's why not only do we have this idea that we have these historical revisionists, the Fortiers and Guyarets, and people like that who are writing and saying that Creoles are only French and white, but
Right.
we have a we have uh, I don't want to say uh, a, a, a sort of a ripoff of the Creole culture, and it's turned into this Cajun society and Cajunization, right? It's turned into Cajun. So we definitely have that happening during this time that you're talking about. Now, Mardi Gras, I'm just going to put out this story about Mardi Gras as far as my family is concerned. Um,
Okay.
my grandmother used to tell me stories about Mardi Gras, and Mardi Gras was a time that a lot of people used to settle scores with people.
Yeah. I've
And
heard
um,
of. Yeah.
and so Mardi Gras is a wild time. People are having a good time. And most people are just out to have some fun. But a lot of people end up dead during Mardi Gras too. And so she said, yeah, you got to be careful when you go on Mardi Gras, and you got to be careful about how you act and the people that you interact with, because things have been known to happen. So
Right.
you're the story you're
And
telling
I'm
is a
sure
little bit more.
they really happened in the 19th century. I'm sure they really happened in the 19th century. And to kind of tack on to what you were saying about these white Creoles, I think it's important for people watching to say that these people were not allies to people of color in all ways or anything like that. You have to realize this is still under the institution of slavery. Okay, so that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is there were certain cultural, there was a cultural connection between these people of color who were Creoles, enslaved and free, and these white people who spoke French and shared a religion. And it's not that they thought of us as equals or loved us in every way, but it's just when these Americans came, this group kind of flocked together for a moment in time.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that all changed when they had, of course, when they had to make a choice. The choice was clear. If they
Hmm.
wanted their children to marry into proper society and to achieve to elevate in the ranks that they had previously enjoyed, they had to quickly depart from that. And in what came about was less allies, less support, and less representation. Even the mightiest free people of color still didn't have the clout to protect other black citizens. So I think that's kind of what we're getting at with that. And I think it's an interesting thing that a lot of people do not discuss Mardi Gras. I still have issues with the idea of certain crews of Mardi Gras because of what they were formed to do that nobody wants to talk about. And it's just a little research away. Again, we say this every time. You don't have to believe us. Do the research. Get on the internet and look into this. So you don't have to believe us. Just look into this. It will blow your mind. I'm not saying a lot because I want you to find out. It resonates deeper when you read what really went on.
And Jeremy, we were talking a little bit about this, but some of the costumes that were worn were sort of give you
Paid
clues
homage.
about this. And so I want you to talk about
I
that.
want to be. I don't want to get too specific about this, but a lot of the themes and a lot of the costumes, and I'm not talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about in recent times. Okay, pay homage to racist ideology and and what we would call the kind of conventional classical ideologies of the Confederacy, and also the origins of these Mardi Gras crews. So it's worth discussing because even today we have issues and division because of this. And this was before the day of the internet, so these people couldn't just send private emails, or they couldn't send text messages to figure out what they were going to do at the Mechanics Institute, or how they were going to organize and create problems. And I remember we discussed this too, that there was a period when schools were integrated
Yeah,
for a little while.
from
That
1870
was,
to 1877. Exactly. Hmm.
and if I'm not mistaken, there was an incident at the Lalaurie House, which a lot of you who watch television know the haunted house. There was an incident even there that was organized by one of these white supremacist groups where they intimidated children of color. So no one was exempt from this, even children. And so this is just something that we have to talk about today, because every day I feel like when we turn on the news, we're seeing so many parallels of what's going on, the bad information, the lies about fraud, the division. We're bringing up this history, not to crucify the people who are dead. We're not interested in saying they're wrong. We already know they're wrong. We're trying to highlight what we need to avoid in the future, and we need to recognize these things because history might not repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I say, when you're seeing these sort of patterns happen at different intervals of time, we're not learning anything from this. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
now we're talking about this disputed election of 1876. Here we have a disputed election. Really, it's not even disputed about 2020 election, but there are people who are in their minds dispute it. You know what I'm saying? And so my thing is that when we see these patterns, and we also see the rhetoric and the misinformation lead to a lot of misunderstandings, right? And
Right.
so that's the situation that we find ourselves in today. And
The
again,
rise of hate groups. The rise of hate
rise of
groups.
hate groups, right? Yeah, and hate crimes, and
And
most
hate.
recently it's
Yeah.
been people knocking down old Asian people. I mean, which is, where does that come from? I mean, it's just, it's insane. It's insane. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Um, Jeremy, there was a couple other things that I know you wanted to touch on. So go for it. Don't let me stop you.
Okay, well, remind me.
Well,
Remind.
I think well, we were talking about these social clubs and they were really, let me take a step back.
Sure.
A lot of the early social clubs were really more so more socially oriented. There was there were philharmonic clubs, a lot of music clubs. For example, I talk about my relative Octave Fawajo. He was in the Lyre Symphony Orchestra, which was a symphony orchestra that was just amateur and professional musicians who used to get together and play, and they had performances, and they used the money that they raised from performances to sponsor young musicians, right? So you can see that these are now, we're talking about this, and this is in 1890. There were no scholarships for young musicians in 1890, especially no young musicians of color. And so they were able to send, for example, young pianists to France to study, right? And so these benevolent societies were formed for different reasons, but again, they morphed into what was needed inside the community, and we had a very close knit community. Many Creoles of color belong to numerous benevolent societies and clubs, right? And we've talked about them offering insurance, burial
Right.
insurance,
Right.
and health insurance. I mean, I've read about this one social club that had a doctor who um, you know um, gave medical care to all the members. So it was, and obviously there was, when after the end of Reconstruction, segregation came back into place. So free people or people of color could not go to white hospitals. So these are necessities, right? And so in these social clubs, obviously the other thing that we want to talk about is the music of the social clubs. Like my relatives are all musicians. My cousins, the Tios, who were members of this Lyre Symphony Orchestra, were professional musicians. That's how they made their living. Um, they not only played, gave lessons to people, performed in New Orleans in different venues, but they traveled to the north, and performed in the north. So you know, these social clubs were also a vehicle for jazz
Right.
and jazz musicians, for jazz itself to flourish and become more widespread, but also for jazz musicians to play and practice their trade. Now, we one of the things that bothers me a lot is that we always talk about jazz musicians and jazz, and the name Storyville always comes up,
Right.
right? And so Storyville is a very famous area in New Orleans, this 8 block area where they had a red light district, right? Um, but um, just before that, this alderman, and I believe his name was first name was James, but I think it's James Story. Um,
Right.
he also was responsible, besides for setting up Storyville, he's also responsible for making the French Quarter creating a segregation law that made the French Quarter exclusively white. So lots of genealogists, and especially people from New Orleans who are looking into their genealogy, suddenly see in the 1890s that they can't find their relatives all of a sudden. They're all moving around, and they're moving to different parts of the city when they've been in houses that they've had for generations, right? And it was because this segregation law, and it allowed no, the French Quarter um, it allowed white people to buy French Quarter property at pennies on the dollar, right? So it paupered the free people of color, and free people of color basically had to start over, and now in a different section of town. Instead of being downtown, they were uptown, right? And so uptown and downtown come together, and people say, oh, well, yeah, well, these two areas mixed. It was the downtown Creoles of color who were well educated and played opera music, and they knew how to read music, and they were into marching bands and brass bands. And then they had these uptown people of color who were untrained but virtuosos and all that stuff. Well, that's all a bunch of crap. And the reason that I say that is this, is that there was already a well-formed musical society in New Orleans long before uh, Storyville was created. And the musical history of New Orleans goes back to pre um, um, the pre 1812 war, right? And we have musicians of color performing long before that in symphony orchestras, in bands, marching bands, and it there and we have a
Untrained
long history of
musician.
opera, right? I mean, and so
Right.
so
Right.
the Storyville and the Storyville area, obviously, jazz musicians played in Storyville. We're not saying that they didn't, but
Right.
it was just another vehicle that that helped jazz form. And jazz moved out from New Orleans, and it moved up the Mississippi River, into places like Chicago and New York and
Right.
even Omaha, Nebraska, where we have Daniel Day Dune, who's a New Orleans musician who brings jazz to Omaha, Nebraska. So um, I want to, when we talk about after Reconstruction, I want to really, really end that idea that jazz was started in Storyville and it came out of Storyville. No, we had a,
And
go ahead.
I think that's important. What you're saying, tremendously important. We did have this discussion because really, what I believe is important to present is that nothing that came out of I won't say nothing. I will say that most of the art form that came from people of color and people of African descent did not result like the overly broad white narrative in some sort of illicit way in an affair. So jazz was already there before Storyville. I mean, we have untrained musicians playing in Congo Square, way before,
In 1800,
way
right? Yeah.
before that,
Mhm.
and we had classically trained Creoles of color. I'm sure jamming and playing with these people because that's just the nature of musicians. But it seems like the narrative, the white narrative, is there's always some sort of birth of something original from some sort of illicit way, whether we're talking about the Creoles come from quadrant balls, jazz comes from Storyville, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's furthest from the truth. And to talk about what happened in the French Quarter, it's absolutely true. If you look on census records or on property transfers, you quickly notice that like around 1880, 1890, boom, everybody's gone. The only people in the French Quarter was really slumlords, and then you saw a wave of Italian immigrants, and they filled in there. The French Quarter really became it really just really in a terrible state. The only positive thing that happened was they said preservation by neglect. Nothing was done. So a lot of these buildings stayed the way they
They
were,
didn't get
and we
demolished, right?
right, it didn't get demolished because people didn't. It wasn't worth it to go in there. People didn't want to deal with it. So preservation by neglect, decay, whatever you want to call it. So that is one redeeming thing. And again, to just talk on Mardi Gras again, you can hear people talk about even in the 1940s and 50s, Creoles of color and other people of African descent, they really couldn't cross canal and participate in white Mardi Gras. And so these a lot of the things we're talking about went through, it even went up to the civil rights movement, and they still exist today. There are still, again, private clubs where chances are I'm not going to be able to get into, my children won't be able to get into, my great grandchildren may not be able to get into. We don't know. Everything's subject to change, but this is a problem, and it's something that we have to talk about and we have to address because we really need to figure out why. Why aren't these people allowing people? And it's because the conversations that take place, the themes that are explored, are not in line with the uplifting of people of color and our agenda. So,
And what you're talking about is I mean, we're saying this, but it's perfectly legitimate for them to have a private club, right? I mean,
sure.
yeah, I mean, um,
No, it's fine. You can have a private club, but I think it's responsibility of people to know what's going on, understand, and use your mind not to support these sort of organizations, or at least have the ability to know what's going on there to decide whether you're going to support them or not. And that's something that's hidden. Don't look at this. Look over here.
mhm.
Don't get distracted by the blinding lights. Okay, these distractions, the same political games, the same odd narratives and aspirations of the same sorts of people are still going on today, and they're still excluding people of color and other marginalized people, and that needs to be known.
Yeah, and especially a situation where you're having a public event like Mardi Gras, going along public streets and publicly paid for and funded all the cleanup and organization. If you have a private club that's not allowing a diverse group to participate, then we should make some
We should be
adjustments for
aware
that.
of that.
Yeah,
And some of these crews no longer parade for that very reason, but they also have sister organizations that may still parade. This is why you need to do your own research. I'm inviting everybody to do research
yeah,
into
yeah,
this. I'm not going
and something, people are going to be mad because you're sort of exposing the underbelly of Mardi Gras and sort of talking about things that don't normally get talked about when Mardi Gras. And obviously this year you didn't have Mardi Gras. Last year they had Mardi Gras, and of course it was a terrible fiasco for the state because so many people got sick. But we need to understand. I mean, these the original Mardi Gras was what, a way for slaves to kind of poke fun at masters, right? So we're it's evolved, and to have a Mardi Gras cruise and people that are in the Mardi Gras parade, sort of giving subliminal Confederate and Confederate sympathy.
includes to their
Yeah,
ancestors. Yeah, it's
to their ancestors. We just need to be, we need to be coaching about that, right? We need to be able to recognize that. We need to be able to recognize these sort of subtle, taps to former racism, and that was in the city. And Louisiana, of course, like I say, people talk about Louisiana, but Louisiana had terrible, terrible things happen as far as racism is concerned, race riots, murders. We even though we sort of celebrate, our Creole heritage, Creoles caught a lot of hell in New Orleans,
right.
and so let me talk about one other thing about this period that followed Reconstruction. So I'm going to say this, that there were many people in New Orleans, and many of these organizations fought for the civil rights of people of color for years. The Société d'Économie, especially, is one of those places. I know that Les Salons was also one of those organizations, and there are many other organizations that and members who fought for this, individuals as well as groups, right? And so after having this sort of burst of good feeling during the Reconstruction, and then having this sort of refreshed suppression of people of color, a lot of people that were from New Orleans decided to leave, right?
Right.
And so in the 1880s, especially, and I'm talking about California now, in the 1880s, 90s, and 1900s, a lot of Creoles of color came to California, and they came to Southern California. And my relatives came to Southern California, both, they came to Northern California and Southern California. They didn't come until the 40s, but there was a good size contingent of Louisiana people here at the turn of the century, and I can name names, but I'm not going to name any names. But they were here, and again, in Los Angeles, we have a good size contingent of former Louisiana folks, and we have our own big crayfish uh, party in Long Beach, and other things like that. So it was, I think people, after they had fought all these years, some people just got fed up and left, right? And so we sort of say they're part of this great migration, but Creoles sort of congregated in areas where other Creoles were, right? And so I grew up in Oakland, California, but everybody we knew was a Creole from New Orleans. Everybody we knew was a Creole from New Orleans, and the Carters and the Fouchés and all the friends that we associated with were all Creoles from New Orleans, and they had settled in the Bay Area. And my cousins from Southern California will tell you the exact same thing, right? Um,
Right.
they had a street where everybody they could run from yard to yard without coming across somebody who wasn't a Creole from New Orleans who had a house there. So um, there was an exodus of Creoles during this time, and they prospered in L.A. Because there weren't the restrictions that they had in the South, unfortunately. So that's a sad thing, and but the reality of it was that's the way they could do best for their family, right?
Right. The
Um,
silver lining, I think the silver lining of a lot of the, if you could turn it into this, the atrocities that happened in the South, is that, like you said, there was this diaspora, another diaspora of people of African descent who spread across the United States. So for those of y'all who watch this and say this has nothing to do with me, those aren't my people. They very well may be your people.
mhm.
We have, the Creoles, the color, and again, we're talking about the people who were enslaved and free people. We're not talking about a certain look. We're talking about the people with colonial roots in Louisiana, in the Louisiana Territory, which is a huge chunk of the United States. Okay, spread out everywhere. They went to Chicago. Some of them even went to Harlem. So it went all over, and of course in California, everywhere there was opportunity, these people went there.
Yeah,
So chances are that you have some sort of connection by proxy to this. So this is your story. This is the bigger story of the United States.
yeah,
And I'm
and
gonna just yeah, I'm just gonna say this as a guy who's into the material culture. We've said this before in other videos. Don't assume that you don't have information or some sort of relics, whether it's photographs, papers, that are not important. Ask people you know if they have something, and ask your family. Do we have anybody that we know from Louisiana, from New Orleans, from other areas?
mhm.
Because you very well may be surprised. This is your story. This is an American story as much as it is Louisiana centric.
Yeah, yeah. So Jeremy, I'm gonna leave it at that. I really don't have anything else that I wanted to say to you. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
The only thing I would say is, because we're trying to go get this down to a certain time limit. I was looking at some of these notes you compiled, and when you read them in the sequence is powerful. If we could find a way to put a link or put them at the end of the video where people can pause or something, I think it's important. Just read through the first couple pages of that and then go back and listen to what we're talking about. And our last video also talks about some of this. So if something was interesting to you, keep looking, keep digging. Don't believe us. We always say,
Mhm, yeah,
don't believe
mhm,
us. Keep looking and keep reading,
yeah,
because you're going to find some other
yeah. There's
things.
the internet. There's books. There's all kinds of things you can check and yeah. And
Right.
we like I say, we always encourage dialogue with people if they have comments to make. We look at some of the comments on some of the other videos, and
Yeah.
if they're reasonable comments, we like to see well thought out, well written, um, you know, um,
Engagement.
yeah, thoughts about what the video was about, and your personal thoughts. So feel free to do that, and I will put the notes on at the end of
Yeah,
this.
I think
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
yeah, I think that's a great idea. So Jeremy, always a pleasure. We kept it under
Okay.
45 minutes, which is really good. We're working on that.
Yeah.
And we'll talk again soon. All right.
Okay. Sounds good. Until next time.
Take care. Bye bye.